Chapter 6 gives us an overview of the macroeconomic perspective of economics. I know the chapter says 19 here. That's just because the combined macro and micro book, this is chapter 19. With the macro book, the one that we're using, this is the information for chapter 6. So this will be chapter 6. This slide shows a picture of the Depression era. The Depression era was probably, well, was the worst period of history as far as economic history in the United States. There was a 25+% unemployment. The highest we were in this last recession was a little over 10%. So 1/4 of the people in the nation were unemployed during that period of time. And we'll refer to that. There were some changes that we made as a country economically that made us look at things differently and how we could help the economy, how we could help the economy improve. In our current economic conditions, the government has goals of economic growth, trying to grow the economy. We have goals of low unemployment, keeping the unemployment numbers at a reasonable amount. We also have a goal of low inflation. Sometimes hard to do when we're balancing things. We have to balance things, and one thing has an effect on the other. We'll see that throughout the course here. The framework we use to measure is aggregate demand, total demand, aggregate supply, total supply. And we're going to look at some different models. We're going to look at Keynes. Keynes came in back during the end of the Depression, and some of his tools were used to actually get us out of the Depression. The thing that really got us out of the Depression was World War II. And we're going to also look at some of the neoclassical models. Some of the tools the government currently uses. The government uses monetary policy. The Fed is actually in charge of that. They look at the amount of money in circulation, the money supply, and they regulate that. And we also look at fiscal policy, the amount of money the government spends, the amount of money the government collects in taxes. So any variation of that is called fiscal policy. One of our main measures of economic growth is our gross domestic product. We measure gross domestic product, and we'll see when we get into that chapter that gross domestic product can be measured on the income or expenditures. This is the way we look at the expenditure side of gross domestic product. We look at the consumption, the government expenditures, investments, plus the net exports. So it's C plus I for investments, plus G for government, plus N, or X in some cases, which means net exports minus imports. We add all those up and we get our total gross domestic product. Graphically, we can see that our GDP consumption is the biggest part of that, what we consume. Government expenditures is the next part, private investment, and then our net exports. We can see that from graph B there, that our imports are greater than our exports. So that really has a negative effect on our gross domestic product. It actually subtracts from our gross domestic product. It has since the 1980s. So for the last 30 years, we've actually been importing more than we've been exporting. So we have what we call a negative net export or a trade deficit. Before that time, we had a lot of time when we had a surplus. Surplus, we can see that from the 60s through the 70s, even up through 75 and almost up to parts of late 70s there, we had a surplus in our trade. So we were actually exporting more than we were importing. Services are a big part of our production in the United States. Services make up 46.7% of all of our production. I know we have the non-durable goods, durable goods, and structures that make up the rest of that production here in the United States. But services are a big industry here. As you can see by this graph, services have had a steady increase over the past 50 years. Services has actually surpassed the production of non-durable goods in the United States. A lot of our non-durable goods are now being made in other countries and then being shipped to us. So the services have surpassed that. Durable goods have remained fairly steady, and so have building structures and that part of the manufacturing business. Figure 19.7 shows our nominal GDP from 1960 to close to the current to 2010. Nominal GDP is dollars that aren't adjusted for inflation. Those are real dollars, are not real dollars, but nominal dollars. They're dollars that haven't been adjusted for inflation. So this is the dollar amount of the GDP during that period of time. The GDP deflator is a way that we measure inflation throughout a period of time on everything that's made on GDP, everything that's included in GDP. So we measure that inflation, and this is a graph showing that GDP deflator over that period from 1960 to 2010. And as you can see, it's rose just like the GDP. The inflation has went up as fast as the gross domestic product. In this slide, we're showing real GDP and nominal GDP. Real GDP is adjusted for inflation. We have a base year when we talk about real GDP. This particular example, the base year is 2005. So we're adjusted to 2005 prices. The prices after that are adjusted for inflation for the 2005 prices. Then the GDP, the years before that, are adjusted. So we can see that the nominal GDP before that period of time is going to be less. The real GDP is going to be more. So we're basing our inflation rates on a base year. Currently, that base year is 2005. We can see in this slide that shows the real GDP in billions of dollars, and we can see that in 2012 that comes out to be about $13 trillion. We can look at our debt clock, our current debt clock now, and we can see that the GDP as of today is about $17 trillion, a little over $17 trillion. So we are having that economic growth. The GDP is a good measure of that economic growth. See how much our economy is increasing its productivity. So the GDP is a way we measure that, measure how much we're growing each year.